if I'm going to recruit a Russian, I'm going to need to meet that Russian in Moscow. If I'm going to recruit a Hezbollah terrorist, I'm going to meet that person in Beirut. Do I want to put my life on the line and trust them if I've coerced them or used negative, leverage on them to get them to agree? No, thank you. A lot of these approaches by the Russians, the Chinese, Iranians, North Koreans are what we call over the horizon.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and almost it's the stroke of midnight hour. Good night in India. So today at Middle East Insights platform, we are going to discuss this very amazing book called as Recruiter, Spying and the Lost Art of American Intelligence. Now, who doesn't remember Stirred and James Bond, Shaken nor Stirred? I don't remember the dialogue properly. But the, chutzpah of Tom Cruise and James Bond and various characters, and even, so many Netflix movies even now about espionage and intelligence. And even for the Indian audience, Salman Khan in Ek Tha Tiger. Like he's this guy who stays alone, flexing his muscles. All the aunties are looking at him, and, he is going all over, killing people. Shah Rukh Khan, they are just falling down from the helicopters, and everyone is like, how macho and how sexy it is. So this is basically what we imagine the life of a spy. That has been taught to us and we consume it, and all of us somewhere dream that, please, one day, maybe somewhere, we will be recruited in some way. For what, how, and what will be the implication of that, we don't understand. But so today we are going to talk with the author of the book, Douglas London. Mr. London is a retired, decorated, 34-year veteran of CIA clandestine service. He's also an adjunct associate professor at Georgetown University Center for Security Studies, a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, and author of The Recruiter, Spying and the Lost Art of American Intelligence, published in 2021. He consults for private enterprises and U.S. intelligence community agencies on national security and intelligence. He has appeared at CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, ABC, NBC, MSNBC. It feels like a lot of alphabets. Mr. London's op-eds have been published in the New York Times, CNN, NBC, Politico, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The Hill, and many others. He's a subject matter expert in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, the Near East, which we generally call as Middle East, Iran, and South Central Asia. His experience as an intelligence community leader includes executive positions as well as field assignments as CIA Chief of Station. He's also active on Twitter. Now, sir, my first question to you is, how do you feel after you retired in December 2018? It's almost 34 years, 4 months. And then in 2021, the book was published. As the book mentions, it took CIA 4 months to redact a lot of statements. You were not allowed to, as obviously, mention people, agents with their real names, the context, the case studies, all of it. There's a lot of metaphor and masking of it because of the vulnerability and sensitivity of it, which I understand. For 34 years, you were living different kinds of lives in different parts of the world, different masks. Now, when the book is published, do you feel more vulnerable Or is it a sigh of relief? The bureaucratic pressure is gone, or there's more freedom to spend more time with your family. How do you feel personally right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the program and greetings to all who are tuning in and your students. And my apologies in advance that if you tuned in to see Salman Khan or James Bond, you'll be sorely disappointed. But just the same, I think I was somewhat charming and dashing in my own way, though quite distant from those images. That's a great question to open up with, and I will tell you, having been interviewed many times, that is the first time anybody really asked me that question. What did it feel like? So thank you very much for that, and I think it has a lot to do with why I wrote the book. 34 years. God, just listening to you say that, it sounds exhausting. I'm tired hearing you say that. But the interesting thing about human beings is we're amazingly adaptive. And we adjust to things that are hard, things that are good, things that are bad, because that's just our nature. And one of the features of mankind that I find endearing and inspiring at times. And that's a awfully dramatic buildup to basically just say that after 34 years, I had a lot of angst trying to come from a life that, exhausting as it might sound, was normalized, having done it for so long, living under cover, living under different types of cover, moving around, finding myself in challenging situations at times, was very normalized, as even hardships are for people in austerity or poverty or war zones and such. It's not necessarily good, obviously, but they adapt to it. I think I felt that I had a story to tell after I retired, and it was really 2019, but you're close. It was just like the beginning of 2019. And I didn't quite know how to tell it because I had lived a clandestine life. I lived a life of secrets, and secrets that I very much wanted to respect. But at the same time, I wanted to perhaps demystify for good, not for bad, people's image of spying and espionage, and that of both the professionals like myself, case officers as we're called, who go out and recruit people to spy and handle them securely and protect them, but the spies themselves, the agents, the people that we ask to conduct espionage, that they're all very, very human. And it's their humanity that often gets them into this, whether by choice or circumstance. And when I first set out to tell my story in an effort to best protect secrets, I thought I'd start out with a work of fiction, but a work of fiction where I would include characters and circumstances that best laid out the points that I was trying to make. But I found myself constantly sort of penning anecdotes that had actually occurred to me. And then I thought, well, I wonder if there's a way I could craft the anecdotes in a way that's sufficiently secure that I could protect, as we say, sources and methods, but still convey to the reading audience what it feels like, what it feels like to be the agent, what it feels like to be the case officer, the human dynamics and all the personal relationship aspects that go into it. And I was able to work out at least some sort of, modus vivendi with the agency where they took out a lot, but allowed me at least enough of a work that I would like to think people get to see what that life is truly like in the shadows.
Yeah, it is. And turning to my next question, sir, because this is a very important question, and I do correct me if I'm asking it in the wrong way. The question is, you were posted mostly as in Middle East, most of the countries, and you had different kinds of experiences. What was your experience with anti-Semitism?
So I spent probably the majority of my time in the Middle East, but also South Asia and some of the former Soviet republics. And I also had some assignments in Africa. I'm not allowed to say exactly where I served, but I could talk about places I've been and sort of in a regional thing. Anti-Semitism was an issue both within my own organization as it was, worldwide. So actually, I did not claim to be Jewish during my time serving at the agency overseas, because considering that I was working in a Middle East environment, that would have certainly made it pretty tricky.
Yeah. And by the same time, how much practice, you cannot confirm or deny how many languages you know. But in Middle East, for example, every region has a different accent of the same language. So Egyptian Arabic is going to be different from the Saudi Arabic. So how did you like start ticking, like smelling the blood, as you mentioned in the book?
So linguistically, I could say I spoke Russian, French, and some Arabic, which I learned from agency schools. And the agency teaches, if you would, the traditional standard, and then you have to fine tune to dialects. So I served some time in North Africa as well as the Levant and the Gulf. And you're absolutely right. The way they speak Arabic is very different. In fact, even some of my Arab friends make fun of one another in terms of their accents and and words they choose and how they describe things and such. So I think what I found among most of the people with whom I work, your effort alone to speak their language goes a long way in opening up a relationship, in getting them to feel that you care, that you're invested. And that's how you learn from the people you're talking to, because you talk with them, you practice with them, they, mostly kindly correct your mistakes, sometimes not kindly, but still either way it sticks. And I was never a gifted linguist, but I spoke conversationally enough to get the job done and essentially open the door with people who felt, wow, this person did care enough to study my language and has an interest. And I think that would go a long way to advancing a relationship with folks. And I'm not just speaking espionage, I'm talking any sort of personal relationship with people.
Yeah. And as your book starts with the character of Bilal, who you see as a mentor, he's elder than you. You are in the very younger stages, initial stages of your career. 1986 is the first time you hear the word spy. And now you talk about Bilal, and there's a lot of metaphor, there's a lot of scenarios which can be very dramatic. And you do mention that dramatic scenarios don't mean that they're insincere. Um, so, one thing which was very particular about Bilal specifically, that Middle East is a place where there are so many tribal differences, massive tribal differences, massive socioeconomic differences because of the tribes and the tribal differences within the sects. Now, the point is, but even in spite of these differences, the concept of Arab nationalism is very particularly prevalent. I don't know if even now it is to that extent. Um, so, in the character like Bilal, or while recruiting agents like Bilal, who are elder than you, who can actually see you through,
Mhm.
more importantly, and who are also the first question that they ask is, what will happen to my family if I become an agent? What will happen to, what will my father say if I, help America? Um, and at the same time, they ask you that how many spies you have in their country. How difficult was that experience for you? Because for some reason, you must have chosen it as a first example.
There's a lot to unpack there, as the younger generation says, because I think you raise a number of interesting points. One about nationalism, differences within countries among people based on ethnicity, region, tribe, religion, and starting out with Bilal. So it's an interesting arc in life where in the early years of my career, obviously, being young, having started my job fairly young, just out of college, really and having pursued people who are mostly older than me, and then finding that sort of that curve changing over time. I think it all starts with respect and dignity and how you treat one another. And, my students ask me, when I teach Intel studies and when I taught our student candidates to become case officers, in terms of what are the things that are more important and what do you recall? And I explained to them that a lot of espionage is simply being a polite, decent human being where you're showing consideration of the person with whom you're speaking, who you're demonstrating a real investment, interest in them, a respect for them. So I think the dynamics with Bilal, because he was someone I generally respected. He was a very smart guy, and he was somebody who I knew was struggling with his circumstances in life, and generally would use jokes and laughter and sometimes self-deprecating humor to kind of help sort of ease that pain. I was aware of that, and I think Bilal also felt he needed to test me before he started opening himself up more and more to see how I would react. And people do that. Bilal did, others would as well, in terms of provocations to see, okay, is this person really being genuine? Are they scamming me, right? Are they playing? Are they acting? And the truth is, in espionage, a spy is manipulating an agent target in the sense of trying to identify what it is that they need, what it is they care about to help align their own interest with why it would be good for them to cooperate with United States intelligence. But it's got to be real. It's not like being, if you would, a used car salesman, right, where you're pretending. There's a bit of acting in a sense of being more dramatic at times in terms of how you're trying to reach people or using humor, but you really are showing parts of your true self because people see through insincerity. They might want to hang out with somebody who's super funny and tells great jokes and haha, but they're not going to necessarily trust those people with their life. And what Bilal was coming to was this crossroads of where was he going to trust me and was he going to trust the CIA with his life? So I think there was some testing there, and I think I tried to respond in a way to demonstrate, yeah, I'm for real, right? I'm legit. I legitimately care about you. I have an interest, no doubt about it, but our interests do align, and they align in a way that will be better for you and your country and better for me and my country. So it's sort of win-win, I think is the most fair way to sell it. But you know, you learn from all the people you meet, and that, again, that's not an espionage lesson alone. That's a life lesson.
Yep.
Right? Even as an educator, I'm sure, Madame, you learn from your students. I'm
Yep.
I'm learning from my students, and they say things and tell me things that make me think. Well, I learned from all the people that I interacted with. I learned a great deal with Bilal, who was, if you would, my first in terms of how to approach it, because clearly I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself at the time and I wanted to be successful, but my success depended on sincerity and him accepting me for what I wanted him to see, which was rooted in truth.
Yeah. And you have also been called as Hungry Duck
By
by
some
your se-
colleagues, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, by
Yeah.
colleagues. 'Cause I was pretty aggressive
Yeah.
and charged pretty hard and fast.
And by the way, I would like to tell students that he was not only recruiting male agents, also female agents. So that is also one of the compliments. Very good.
Well, yeah, but it was a little bit of trial by error for me, as revealed in my book, where my
Yeah.
very first try, I totally crashed and burned. And again, talking about lessons learned from it, which I did to use more effectively in the future.
Yeah. How much does and I'm just trying to ask it in a um, experience kind of way. When you're in a South Asian country, for example, or a West Asian, Middle Eastern country, not because they're also white in color, most of them, but specifically in South Asia, your skin color gives you away.
Oh
There
yeah.
are two kinds of population, primarily, if I talk in binary, that you will meet. One who are going to be obsessed. If you come now, they're obsessed for about taking selfies with you. That is one, the Gen Z generation.
Though I
And
never had that experience, so maybe it's changed over time. So,
yes, it has. All
oh
my
wow,
friends who come,
I have to go back then and,
yes,
and, and see if some people are excited to see me.
yes, everyone is like, the moment they see a foreigner, they want selfies, even if like, no, hi,
Wow.
hello.
Okay.
And I literally have to protect my friends. I'm like, do not come near them, get out. So this is how I protect. So, and the next is those who are very skeptical,
Okay.
just because of the color of the skin. It is
Right.
normally it is said that, okay, racism is something. Whenever we think about racism, we think about United States or we think about the West, but not exactly. Here in India,
Okay.
it's also there.
Yep.
and your skin color gives you away. So how were you able to embed yourself in, because you will be the moment you enter a hall, you will be seen as someone different, not because of whoever you are, but because of your
Mhm.
skin color.
Well, I don't think as a white guy, I'm trying to pretend to be, blending in with the local population, but I'm trying to at least be more of a natural feature. There are, in India and to a lesser extent Pakistan, there's a lot of white people there, not just as tourists, but a lot of young folks who are trekking, visiting, and staying at hostels and such like that. And so in my days, and like I say, I've been in India and I've been in Pakistan and I've been in Afghanistan. You know, People noticed me obviously, but I didn't get that kind of stuff. I got reaction from people who were trying to sell me things, or some of the very sad poor kids, or other
Yeah,
folks who were begging
yeah,
for money and
yeah,
such like that. But I didn't. I neither had the experience of people. I mean, there were no cell phones when I was starting out in the '80s and early '90s. So I didn't have that. But I didn't have people necessarily obsessed with me either. But I had to try to find a way to be what they would be used to seeing if they saw a white person in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore or what have you, or in Karachi or Islamabad, and there are enough of them around that if you dress apart and look the part, they notice you, but you don't necessarily stand out. And remember, my efforts were both in terms of reaching out and recruiting people, which was where I was making direct contact with someone and trying to have sustained personal contact, going out or doing things or whatever, and then handling them clandestinely. And the clandestine piece usually comes in the dark anyway, where everybody kind of blends in a little bit more, and people stand out a bit less if you're doing it right.
yeah. It is the entire concept of spotting the spook that you talk about, and the backstreet conversations and all the drama that you have infused in the writing, that really um, is very dramatic, but it's also very scary. Scary for you specifically because you will also be under surveillance uh, by the agencies of that particular country,
Yeah.
just
Yeah, but
as
it comes. And I hate to say this because it'll lessen me even more in the eyes of maybe you and your students, but that's fun. It's a bit of a game. It's a very serious game because there's life and death consequences, particularly for the agents you're handling. But being in places where, you know, it's you alone against lots of other people because the surveillance teams of, local governments, whether it's the FBI in America or, the IB in India or what have you, there's a lot more of them and they have a lot more cars and people and it's their town and their turf. So the challenge of stealing things from under their noses is, there's a fun, espionage is fun, very serious, but it's fun. And they have to mess up a lot, which they tend to, by the way we practice tradecraft. If I make one mistake, I'm done. And so are my agents. I can't ever make a mistake. And I think any intel service, not just the CIA, is looking for people who like that, who, like a cricketer, right? He wants it to come, or she wants it to come. They want to hit it. They're not like, oh, please, I don't want to miss. It's like, please let me hit. And very much I felt the same way. I wanted to be out there in the street and I wanted to be, challenged and I wanted to win.
Do you think, sir, that the those specifically now with so many devices around us of various kinds of surveillance, do you think that espionage have become more even more difficult now?
There's always been evolutions of technology to which espionage has adapted. If you think about it, everything from the telegraph to the telephone to the internet, computers, and now we're at an age of what we call ubiquitous technical surveillance. To your point, where that's what we call it all the time. There's cameras, your watch, your phone, your car, your washing machine. It could be on Wi-Fi, revealing the patterns of when you do your laundry, right? So there's a lot of things out there, and it's again comes back to humanity that we adapt. So we've adapted over the years to defending ourselves against the threats from technology, but likewise manipulating how we could use it to our own advantage. So I think it's kind of evident when you see the CIA putting out advertisements in the form of videos to the Russian community on Telegram saying, come talk to us. We want to hear you. We want to help you. Clearly, we're still spying, and clearly, we're still being successful. We've just had to change our tradecraft, which we always have to do. We always have to adapt and stay ahead, ideally, of the challenges and adapt and take advantage of what those same tools could offer us on offense, as well as our concerns for defense.
Yeah. To the students, I would like to mention that why I have not completed the book yet, but couple of reasons why I think that the book is a must read. The first point is obviously the humanization of agents and the other agents that are recruited from the indigenous areas. Second is also the kind of family life, the regular transfer or posting impact. Third is the impact on the mental health of the agents that we never think about. Like, for example, how do you practice anxiety control? How do you practice anger control? How do you practice, along with oratory powers and speech and accent and dialects, all of this? There's a very strong part of mental health, which is often, PTSD is not only for armies and soldiers and those who are in Iraq or Afghanistan. Post-traumatic stress.
You ask great questions, actually. And you do, because I try to talk to my students about that. I say, now think on it now. Let's say I'm the case officer and I'm in Moscow or Beijing or some other place that's, difficult. There's a lot of pressure on me and stress, but it's nothing like the pressure on the Russian who is spying for us, the Chinese national who is basically feeling all alone, that at any moment, at any time, things could go very, very badly. It's not like they can meet their case officer every day because of the counterintelligence threat. There has to be a very careful, deliberate way of communicating. And the strain that those people are under is even for me unimaginable, because I've been under risk and in dangerous places, but to have that where your whole world is like looking at you, or at least you feel that way, that's an immense pressure, and it's why we, as the professionals who recruited them and handle them, have an immense obligation to them. And mental health and anxiety is an important component for them, as well it is for our own people. And obviously we do have our challenges, particularly from the stress and the pressures, or the actual war zones where we are under fire in conflict zones. And I tell a couple of those stories in my book as well. But I thank you very much for raising that, because I think that's a critical component that people often overlook.
And apart from that, also, don't you think, sir, that an entire life, 34 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever, a person just completely gives up their life? I would not say that it is a asymmetrical trait, because there's fun adrenaline burst, there's so much of adventure, there's the thrill of it. But at the same time, there's a lot of loss also in
I
terms
think
of
it's
family.
fair.
In terms
Yeah.
of your own personal relationships and safety, but don't you think that and then they go into oblivion? Whatever they did, it cannot be published. Whatever they
Right.
did cannot be confirmed or denied. Whatever they did, as if it was meaningless and it never happened. So how do you completely try to maintain your sense of reality? Because real
Well,
and unreal is very difficult then.
yeah. Now you're going to make me have to go find a therapist and start talking to somebody. So I tell students and such, as far as the life in the agency, particularly as a case officer, you know, work-life balance is hard. We talk about that work-life balance as you're speaking to. But work-life balance is hard if you're a doctor or a lawyer or having a lot of hard jobs as well. The difference is a case officer is living a lie, undercover, that their family is living as well with them. Your partner knows obviously what you're doing and has to. It has to be supported, whether they work for the organization or not. Your children don't, at least when they're young, don't. So, when daddy can't go to their soccer game, their football match, because he got an emergency signal to meet an agent, the kid can't tell the coach that, oh, dad's spying tonight, so he's not available, right? So you are making excuses and you're telling lies. But circling back to what I said earlier, that all becomes kind of normalized. And as I told my children, as they got old enough to know, and as they got old enough where they were going to do more harm by not knowing, because as you get more senior, your cover erodes a bit. You're still undercover, but not as deep a cover. Usually, the local government at least knows who you are because you have a relationship with them. But you also have to protect those that they don't know about. So your children, when they, and people make different choices. For me, when they hit their teen years, I started telling them, and my kids were actually relieved because they thought I had been a professional failure my entire life. They saw their other friends, fathers and mothers getting promoted and having big offices. And, I didn't really get promoted much and moved around a lot. So they were like, oh my God, my dad's a failure. Luckily, he can still feed us. So I think they were all like really gratified when they found out, well, here's why my life was sort of more off the stage, off the center stage, because, I was spying for all these years. But it is intense. And my family, what I can say is I had 9 what we call permanent assignments abroad, where I actually lived in a place 9 different times. It's usually 2 to 3 years, sometimes 1 year if it's a war zone. 3 of those places, two of those places, my family came and had to evacuate from because of security. Another one they had to evacuate, they got to come back. And a couple of them were they were so dangerous for them as, adult dependents or even kids that they couldn't come in the first place. And that's part of a life in service. But, at least what my children tell me is, they're happy for the life they led. They love growing up overseas. They are colorblind when it comes to people because they've seen me and their mother host people of every ethnicity and color and referring to them as uncle and auntie and with great respect. And that's how they in turn treat people, which gives me a great deal of satisfaction as a parent that they're good people, my children. But they also get restless because they're used to moving around. They've had to change schools a lot. When they got evacuated, they had to change schools in the middle of a school term and, start their life all over again. So absolutely, there are struggles. And I've never told my children, oh, you should follow in dad's footsteps. I've said, why don't you become a lawyer, or a business person, get a nice big house and, be home for the holidays and whatever. Most of them have not listened to me and have gone into the armed services or medical careers where they're helping people. So which is good and bad. I wish they had more comfortable lives, but I'm very proud of them.
Yeah.
So there's a price to pay and there's a struggle, and you have to really be committed that you're getting something out of it. But just to touch, and I know I'm rambling here, at the end, it's the end. And you move on, and that's you take your oath, and your oath is not just to your government and your organization, but the people that you've worked with and interacted with over the years. And if you want to be famous, you don't become a spy, right? You do something else.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. One of the problems that I felt that I was never able to maintain organic connection with that place wherever I went in a conflict zone. For example, when I went to West Bank, yes, I have emotional connection, but not a very organic. Like, I don't know if I'm able to explain. Would I really want to go back again? Would I really want to go back to Egypt? Would I really want to go back to another conflict area? Do I really have the energy to do it again?
Yeah, I think what draws me to, or has drawn me to places like that has been the people. Been to the West Bank and such, and been to occupied territory and Palestinian under the Palestinian Authority, and it's really the people that
Yeah.
draws me and continues to compel me today, whether or not I get to go back to places like that or not.
So my question to you is that how do you navigate the immigration process?
You mean just traveling, such like
Yeah.
that? So, these days, in my day, without getting into too much detail, you could travel in an alias persona. I could be somebody else. with another passport. Even of another country, as long as I have the language to maintain it, and you do it like everybody else. You apply for a visa, right? As that person. These days it's a lot trickier. You can't just switch personalities because the
Yeah.
internet, retina scans, fingerprints,
Biometrics.
and biometrics and everything else. So it's different doing that, but you do things as anybody else would. So through embassies and channels, or these days more and more online to
Yeah.
apply for visas. Most every country is online.
But there's also, the certain kind of a face changing, temporary face changing capsules that maybe bulb.
Nah,
Not
nah,
really,
that
doesn't
doesn't
work.
really work. No, doesn't
Okay.
really work.
Okay.
Good in movies, good in books, but not in reality.
Because
No.
your biometrics remains the same.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the artificial intelligence understands and can detect anomalies that are inconsistent, right? And I'm not a tech guru, but I know enough about it because I had to negotiate it to know that's not going to work. So I mean, the agency CIA has always used disguises, right? So if you're in a country, you could do things maybe to make it harder for CCTV cameras to identify you from an image, and there are means to do that. But at the same time, technology is trying to evolve and go, okay, well, there are other things we can identify, such as, and it's no secret to say, biometrics can identify even your gait, how you walk, right? And they could recognize that as a profile and a pattern. And they put everything together, your eyes, your shape, your walk, all these kind of things. So I'm not saying there aren't some tricks that are still able to work on some occasions, but technology is also pretty smart, and it's a lot of it is manipulating the technology and manipulating the people behind the technology,
Yeah.
right? To kind of get
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. When Google asks you, or any of the websites that are robotic ask you, are you a robot? So
Right. Yeah.
that is the fun of the time. I'm going to come back to Middle East, but there are a couple of questions here by
Sure.
Gaurang. He says that, sir, you speak about the importance of saving assets. How would you assess the current criticism by Sarah Adams and Sondran with the Afghan situation?
Sean Ryan, I haven't seen much. Sarah Adams, I've seen a lot. I think Sarah went through a very traumatic experience, and it's certainly given her a point of view. I respect what she went through. And I think Sarah is very concerned about the people we lost, and we did, and it was a tragedy for all of us. But I don't tend to buy into a lot of conspiracy theories, and I'm not saying Sarah does if she's listening. But I think sometimes the emotion influences a point of view, and I've been very critical of the agency over different things. I think read my book, but I also don't buy into a lot of conspiracy theories and
Yeah,
such. So to just generically speaking, the obligation you take, particularly as a case officer, is you've got to protect your agent. You got to protect your agent at all costs and with your life. And I don't think we'd have a whole lot of agents if it kept getting around that we didn't give a damn and we left people out in the cold, or we cut ties with them and abandoned them because even in a clandestine world, that kind of thing becomes noted and people respond to it.
yeah, it is. The second question is, movies and even books have often portrayed a striking difference. CIA uses noble persuasion and morality with a sense of monetary benefits, as opposed to the GRU or the FSB that exercises coercion to develop assets. Now, that is, 2000 Hollywood movies funded by the CIA somewhere,
I wish. But it's a good question. And it's
Yeah.
something I actually teach to and speak to in intelligence studies. The CIA's practice of tradecraft is basically to try to leverage people's motivations as opposed to their vulnerabilities, which means we don't really use coercion. And it's not because we're just such wonderful people and classy people. The reality is it doesn't work very effectively. So the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, North Koreans, they use what we call as a formula in English, it works out to mice. It's money, ideology, compromise for compromise, and ego. And basically, it's looking at what are people's flaws? What are their, are they in debt? Are they a substance abuser? Are they cheating on their partner? And try to leverage with coercive pressure sometimes to get control over them. The CIA just truthfully doesn't find it effective. I like to believe it's also, ethically, I like it better the way we do it. But here's the reality. If I'm going to recruit a Russian, I'm going to need to meet that Russian in Moscow. If I'm going to recruit a Hezbollah terrorist, I'm going to meet that person in Beirut. Do I want to put my life on the line and trust them if I've coerced them or used negative, leverage on them to get them to agree? No, thank you. A lot of these approaches by the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, North Koreans are what we call over the horizon. They're not spying on America in America. They're spying by reaching out to people and asking them to do things over virtual lines or through a bunch of different middle people. The Chinese very much the same, the Iranians, even a lot of the Russian operations. So if you're on your own home turf, you could get away with being coercive, right? There's maybe less of a consequence. But what my challenge to them would be, can you stand behind your intelligence? When our intelligence reports go to our consumer, and our number one consumer is the president, we have to give our consumer an idea of who is the source, not by name, but why are they doing this? How reliable are they? Do we have a relationship? Have they been tested? And under what circumstances they acquired their information? How do you want to sell your intelligence by saying, oh, we strong arm this person. That's why the person produced the intelligence. Then how much can you invest in the reality and the veracity of that information? So again, that's another very practical feature of why, spying is not necessarily noble, but we have a lot of noble people who do it, who want to change their country, who want to right the wrongs that they've seen or the disadvantages that their, group, their regional, ethnic group, religious group have suffered from in their country at the hands of governments that are not necessarily to them legitimate. But we try to do it in an ethical way and in the most effective way. And that means enlisting partnerships with our agents, not forcing them at, gunpoint or threat or, manipulating negatives.
Yeah, or putting bugs in the bathroom.
Yeah, I've never done that. So.
Yeah. Israel has specifically, as Boris Johnson said, that his bathroom was bugged. And that was something that I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of reasons why it wouldn't be true, but I won't get into. But
yeah,
okay.
It would be smarter to bug Dominic Cummings, though.
Well, there you go, right?
Yeah.
See, again, practicality takes over.
Yeah. So Graham Aiken, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. He's asking that he's a PhD student in national security here in UK. He's halfway through your book. It's excellent. Can you please talk about, just a second. Can you please talk about how you see artificial intelligence impacting human intelligence in tradecraft, for better or for worse?
Yeah, really good question. We were kind of touching on this a little bit earlier, weren't we? Talking about AI and the good and the bad of it. And like any technology, espionage, not just, America, but India as well, because Indian services, RAW and IB, practice their fair bit of espionage, are going to try to harness it to their advantage, both to identify counterintelligence threats and also to allow them to take advantage of operational opportunities. So artificial intelligence is basically as good as the data that's fed into it. Quantum computing, which is around the corner. And again, I'm not trying to pretend to be anything I'm not. I'm certainly not a techie, but I understand enough about the tools as it applies to human intelligence operations. It's definitely a challenge to better protect and to protect your operations, to protect clandestinity when there's so many tracking means, right, of you and entire populations. Right? Look at China's system where they want to see where everybody is all the time, everywhere. Okay. So it needs adaptation to deal with. And there are ways, clearly we're doing it because we're still spying. God love us. So it's got to be, you got to stay ahead of it. What you can't do is be reactive. You can't wait and see what the fallout is. You have to be part of the process. And I think most governments are, and not just America, India as well, certainly China is, to try to keep their foot on the accelerator and try to get ahead of it, because you can't run away from it. You can't deny its existence, and you have to harness it for both the bad and the good. So that may be a circuitous answer to your question, sir, but it's at least the basic framework of the reality.
Okay. The next question is going to be a bit, you can choose, I'll edit it out. Was CIA involved in regime change in Bangladesh?
Well, I'm old, but I'm not quite that old. So I wouldn't be able to speak to it. From what I understand of history, it was not. Oh, you're talking about the more contemporary. I'm sorry, I was going back to the war in the
I
70s. No,
no.
no, I'm not in the CIA right now, so again, I couldn't say, but I think that was pretty organic. I think all you had to do was look at what was going on in Bangladesh and read the press and look at the record of that particular leader. And some might say, I'm surprised she lasted that long.
Yeah.
So I don't think the agency or anyone outside of Bangladesh, I think she had everything to do with her dispatch from government.
One of the reasons that UK is not giving visa, US is not giving visa, I don't know, the Gulf countries are not giving visa, and she's very close to me right now. Like, not
Oh
literally,
yeah,
but
yeah,
just geographically. But
yeah.
anyway, that question was asked by Anurag. Sir, in your book, you talk about Hezbollah suicide attacks. For example, in October 23, 1983, when suicide attacks killed 241 US servicemen. December 12, 1983, when Hezbollah attacked the American and French embassies in Kuwait. March 16, 1984, Hezbollah kidnapped CIA's Beirut head of operations William Buckley. Later, 18 US service members were killed on 12th of April 1984 by Hezbollah attack, and many other hijacking and others. My question to you is, and this is, you know, we analyze what is happening right now between Israel and Iran, or between Israel or the Seven Front War. I'll just cut it short. In political terms, how do you understand it in intelligence terms? Because 7th October last year, Mossad didn't know. Now Mossad knows exactly the spot of Hassan Nasrallah. They are going to even target Sistani in Iraq, as predicted.
Yeah, so intelligence has been a major component of this war, right, from the beginning. And people talk about Israel's intelligence failure that enabled October 7th to occur. And now they're talking about, oh, they've changed, they've gotten better, look how great they're doing against Hezbollah. But those are two different theaters and two different issues. And some of what has come out of what went wrong in October a year ago wasn't necessarily they weren't collecting intelligence, they chose to interpret it the wrong way. And some of that's driven by policy. And certainly we've had the same experience in the United States over history many, many times. And I would allege that the same has occurred in India based on my
Yeah.
reading of the tea leaves, right? Lebanon is a much easier place to operate than Gaza, right? So for one thing, you need different types of intelligence. And when I say that, and I'm not trying to go into classroom mode, there's six forms of intelligence. There's signals intelligence, right? That you're listening to people's conversations or phones, and Israel is really good at that. But Gaza has only limited infrastructure for that. There's imagery, satellites. Well, Hamas does most of their stuff underground. There's human intelligence, but who in Gaza is going to spy for the Israelis? Right? I know the Israelis have tried. In fact, Yahya Sinwar, the current leader of Hamas, his claim to fame was killing Palestinians who were working for Israel. And most of them were people that the Israelis had arrested for whatever reason and persuaded while in jail to work for them. Often, I think personally, and I'm just speculating here, under some degree of coercion. If you want a visa to come back and work in Israel or whatever, or you want to be free, you'll work for us and such like that. A lot of that wasn't really working for them. They had a lot of imagery. They had, pictures and cameras and overhead and drones and stuff like that. That limits you what you're collecting and what you can do with it. Lebanon's a divided country.
Yeah.
Christians, Sunni, Druze, Shia, and people are willing to talk bad about other people. So there's human possibilities. There's also divisions within these groups. Hezbollah is not necessarily as cohesive. It was basically started out as formed by a number of families, then became a bit more bureaucratic. There's some tensions within that evolution over time. There's also a lot of infrastructure in terms of cellular phones and, microwave towers and everything else that's going on there. So I think Israel had a much easier playing field in Lebanon than it did in Gaza to be successful. But what people call their success isn't necessarily that all of a sudden they found Nasrallah. My own personal guess is they were always able to track Nasrallah. He's the leader of that group. He's being careful, but he's not necessarily hiding out. He's more worried about a car bomb or something like that getting him. He's not expecting to be killed in his underground bunker by, hundreds of bombs that they would take out entire blocks, city blocks and such like that. So I think it's really that Israel has been making decisions that we wouldn't take in the United States by rule of law, just to lay it out there in a clinical fashion, that, okay, we'll kill a few hundred people to get these one or two people. And I think it's been policy decisions which has allowed Israel to kill a lot of people. And I would tell you, from my perspective, in Hezbollah, a lot of bad people. Ibrahim Akil, Fuad Shukra, I was chasing them for years. They were involved in both the embassy attack in '83 and the Marine barracks, the hijackings, and probably Kobar Towers in '96 and Argentina in '94. These were not good people. The U.S. had bounties of $7 million. Talal Hamani, I think is his name, is the last remaining person of that generation, still sits on the Jihad Council, still won it for $7 million. I'm not going to be sad to see these people go. I hunted them myself. But I also look at it practically. War is not good for anybody there. War means instability. It means suffering, and it means it's going to expand. More people are going to get involved, and that makes it even more dangerous. So I believe it is everybody's interest, including Israel, that the carnage stops. Israel should be able to defend itself. Lebanon should be, have its world. The United States believes in a two-state solution for, Palestine and Israel, which I subscribe to as well. That will all move towards a more secure world for everybody. I don't think in 2024 you can win a war simply by winning battles. The United States won most every battle in Afghanistan and most every battle in Iraq, but would we say we won those wars? I don't know that we would, and I don't know that we should. The first Gulf War, where the United States liberated Kuwait with its allies, we won that war. We came, we did what we needed to, we left, Kuwait is liberated. The Bosnian Serbs, I'd say that was a win, right? Though we see tensions there today with Serbia and Kosovo and all these different places.
Yep.
But, tell me how many battles the United States lost, but tell me the wars they won. Somalia, we actually lost a terrible battle. People know about, Black Hawk Down and stuff like that, and we wound up leaving that country. The United States, the French, the Israelis left Lebanon before Hezbollah had standing armies, rockets, missiles, and such like that, when just a bunch of people were blowing things up and killing people. Now, most of those people are dead now. Some of them took longer than others. Imad Mughniyeh, who killed more Americans and Israelis than anybody else until Al-Qaeda, died in 2008. His brother-in-law, Mustafa Badruddin, died in 2015. The famous writing, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So again, you got to look at these things clinically and separately, whereas the best thing for the world is that there's stability there, which means the bloodshed stops, right? That's in the best interest, not just, oh, well, look who we killed now, and isn't that great?
So one thing now that is also very scary, because you're talking about satellite images and everything. Now Russia is going to give Iran more satellite images of Israel.
That Iran's going to acquire more satellite imagery. I mean, now with commercial Russia. Imagery, you could see a lot. So I mean, what are they looking to see? They're looking for coordinates, which they seem to be okay at, even just by commercial imagery. The Russian relationship with Iran is concerning, but I am also a believer in history, and Iran's history is having been invaded and occupied by Russia at different times. And I would tell you, the Iranians, they don't forget that. Right? If anybody knows history, It's Iran and it's
Yeah.
Iranian. So they're going to, in a transactional fashion, engage and get what they can from Russia, but it's not like they're going to become besties or best friends because there's a lot of poison still in those waters from centuries.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is. I hope that um, the relationship that India has with Iran, which is much more historic, remains
Yeah.
in that way. It
Yeah.
is, but again, the times are so binary right now that if you speak anything, even from the humanitarian perspective, it's like you're pro-Iran. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
no, it's whatever you say. I mean, I write articles, as you noted. I wrote an article for Politico magazine in the United States on what's going on in the Middle East, and I had some people saying, "Oh, that was great," and other people telling me, we should blow up your house so you understand what it feels like. So, people look at the news based on what they already believe, predetermined beliefs. At least in the United States, people tend to choose whatever publication they read or TV channel they turn into based on wanting them to agree with each other. So that's what's disheartening for me because as an intel officer, I am clinical, right? Yeah, I have my own personal feelings, whatever, but I see the world clinically and I need to see the world empathetically, which is different than sympathetically. Because if I can't understand the way people are looking at their situations, I can't do anything about it. But I think more and more people around the world just want to hear what already feeds into what they've already predetermined, which means they're not going to see the truth necessarily if they're not willing to entertain other possibilities.
my second last question to you, sir, is what do you, I know no one can predict, but how do you clinically and through intelligence predict, is there any end in sight of what is going on in Middle East?
When I step back and I wrote this in the piece I published, I think uh, Prime Minister Netanyahu turned a corner where he came at some point where a lot of what he was doing in my analysis was to defer a day of reckoning for his failures that led to October 7th, for which the Israeli populace seems to want him out of office, just based on the polls and what you see, to a point where he figured out, I might actually be able to win this thing militarily because there's very little that any of the Western governments can do to stop me. The United States 3 weeks out from an election isn't going to punish me and hold back arms and whatever like that. The Brits, the other countries, they're not going to do anything, right? Iran's caught between a rock and a hard place because Iran's got lots of problems of its own. Khamenei's 85. He's not in the best of health. His successor, or expected perhaps to be Raisi, died. He's had to take on at least a mouthpiece in Pezeskian, I think, who pretends to be a moderate, but he wouldn't be there if he really was a moderate, to try to see if he can get some sanctions relief because people are beginning to criticize Khamenei now in Iran. That's new. Okay. And he's under great pressure from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to retaliate and stand up for their honor, and they're embarrassed and humiliated. But he's a smart enough man to know he's not going to win an escalation ladder with Israel and the United States. So he's got a tough situation, which I think Netanyahu feels he can press because he can.
Yeah.
The difference is, I don't think winning the battles today will win the war for Israel over the long term. And I expect his enemies to adapt. And I fear other countries will get drawn into it as well, including the United States, which is not really great. So I am not very optimistic at the moment. I think things might change after the election, regardless of who wins in the United States, because they'll be in office for 4 years. And if they want to take more risky choices politically, they could, which right now Washington can't. But for the time being, there's very little to influence Netanyahu and even his own people. The protests have stopped, right? All these families were protesting in the tens of thousands, make a deal, get our family members back. What could they say? I mean, Israel's killing, their enemies. I mean, it's it's an interesting time and it's a challenging time, and I fear there will be long-term second order consequences that
Yeah,
we may not
yes.
see right away.
Yeah, it is. And specifically because of the media censorship, also people are not allowed to, come together in a large number as they used to
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of the situation right now. And today is the first casualty of a couple by Hezbollah in Israel, the first civilian couple to die out
Okay.
of the rocket launch. And but this is all of it is going, and there's propaganda, there's so much like complete propaganda sites, which it's interesting how they flip the narrative both ways. And the question now, sir, is do you, the question that one of the two volunteers was asking is that, in your understanding, which country's intelligence agency would you rank in the top five? CIA?
Of course. Yeah.
Ben?
Um, I think the British are still very good, I'd
Hmm.
say, but in some ways, I think their home service MI5 is better even than MI6 to some extent. I think actually the Dutch are very good. The Dutch have a very good service that
Okay.
fights what we would say above their weight scale, right? They do a lot of very interesting thing. I think some of the other Scandinavian countries as well have good services. I've had engagement with India's intelligence services before, and they're certainly competent and professional. I think sometimes their constraints are more policy constraints
Yeah.
by political leadership as
Yeah.
opposed to competency and capability and such. Some of the Middle Eastern services are very good, but unfortunately, they use a lot of their efforts against their own people, So I'm not going to name them and get them all mad at me. When people think about, oh, Israel's really great, one has to also remember that Israel's got like one place of focus. So the United States is looking at 183 countries and all sorts of issues, so our resources get spread. Israel is very intensely focused on their neighbors, the Palestinians, Iran, so they're able to sort of generate everything into one bag. And they are good at certain things. They're very good at certain things. But I don't give them maybe the due that some of the myth is accrued to them because they kill a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't, and they have massive PTSD.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
look at the Russians. The Russians kill a lot of people, but you always know it's the Russians. So that's not good. If
Yeah.
you're a spy, if you're an espionage service, nobody's supposed to know, or at least they shouldn't have like a hard trail back to you. But
Yeah.
when you've got pictures from Bellingcat of the actual assassins and stuff like that, clearly you're not doing it clandestinely or not doing it particularly well.
Yeah. So, my last question to you, sir, is that, is the book the right catharsis for you, or do you expect maybe after 20 years or maybe after 15 years to write another?
So the book was very cathartic. I think what I have in mind is another book that is going to take more of a focus on much of what we talked about today in terms of how has espionage changed over the last quarter of a century, right? Last
Yeah.
25 years, and why, and try to sew in some other anecdotes that the agency, having shared some of these for their review, is kindly allowing me to offer in a version. And if I could pull enough of those together, that might be my next effort.
All the best, and I hope it happens soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir, for the privilege of your time. It was actually very fun and I'm going to watch it properly again by myself and to learn more because there's a lot to learn from this particular
Well,
talk.
it was my
So
great pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for your brilliant questions and those of your audience. They were very good questions. So thank you.
thank you so much, sir. And